Welcome to Watchman on the Wall, a daily outreach of Southwest Radio Ministries and SWRC.com. Today, archaeologist and author Randall Price is here, ready to discuss the Third Temple and its impact on today's Christian. New year means new opportunities to meet your friends from SWRC and Watchman on the Wall. Our first Prophecy in the News Live event is coming to the Seattle area Friday and Saturday, March 14th and 15th. 2 full days of nationally known speakers unveiling the coming cosmic conflict, the new America, and the Jewish roots of Christianity. Speakers include Eric Barger, Micah Van Huss, Greg Patton, Mac Dominic, and Larry Stamm. Registration is now open. Reserve your spot today. Visit swrc.com or call 1-800-652-1144. Prophecy in the News Live in Bellevue, Washington, March 14th and 15th. Here's Clayton Van Huss, host of Biblically Grounded, our weekly television program about archaeology and the Bible.
I'm your host, Clayton Van Huss, and I'm joined today by a special guest, Dr. Randall Price. Dr. Price is probably well known to many of our viewers. Dr. Price, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, Clayton.
It's great to have you. And so we've met up at a conference, as tends to happen. It's why our set is not here. But I think we're going to have a great program today, even without all of our usual trappings. Dr. Price, we're here at this conference, and we've been listening to you talk about just the situation in Israel, the Temple Mount, the things that are happening there, and people are looking in that direction. So we want to talk about that today. Before we get started, can you tell those of us who maybe don't know much about you a little bit about your background?
Yeah, I've been a pastor, professor, and certainly a parent too. So we have 5 children and 13 grandchildren, which my wife always tells me to mention up front because that's the most important thing. But I studied at Dallas Theological Seminary, got a THM in Hebrew and Old Testament. I went to Hebrew University and Jerusalem and studied basic, what we call ancient Semitic languages and archaeology. And then I came back to the University of Texas at Austin and did a degree. They didn't have a PhD program in archaeology at the time, but I took the archaeology courses and got a degree in Middle Eastern studies there. And from there, I've done various things, one of which was I have taught at different schools. The last one was Liberty University. I was there for 16 years as the executive director of the Center for Judaic Studies and taught biblical archaeology there. I have also a ministry called World of the Bible Ministries, which has its purpose to deal with the past, the present, and the prophetic world of the Bible, because that's a center piece in God's prophetic program as well as just through history itself. And many people will never get to go there, and because the content of Scripture is set in the context of the world of the Bible. It's very important to help people understand it in its original context before they exported it to the 21st century and wanted to apply it to their lives. So that's been part of our work, so both academically and in terms of just a ministry to reach out to the common person with information about the biblical text and the world from which it comes.
Sure, and you're a prolific author. Many of our viewers are probably familiar with your book, The Stones Cry Out. I know that sits on my shelf and has for long before I was interested in biblical archaeology.
Yeah. It's currently being revised, by the way. So next year, you'll have a much improved, larger, full-color version of that coming out. It was when I wrote Stones Cry Out, I had not actually done any archaeological excavation. And since then, I've been director of excavations at Qumran for 10 years, and another 3 years at the cave excavations. I excavated also in Jerusalem, what we call the Kotel excavations and others. So I'm adding that experience, and then anybody that knows archaeology knows almost every day something changes in the field. Things get clarified, new discoveries are made, always in favor of the Bible, I might say, and that's why we wanted to improve that. I have a handbook of biblical archaeology that was done by Zondervan, and that is probably the most up-to-date thing and helpful for people.
Yeah, that was one of my absolute favorite textbooks as I was studying archaeology. Enjoyed that immensely.
I know Dr. Stripling used it. So.
Yes, sir. So, Dr. Price, we're going to talk about some things today that a lot of people want to shy away from, because we're going to touch on current events. We're going to touch on maybe some speculation, because you're always asking questions about these things. We're going to touch on politics a little bit. This is some scary stuff. One of the things that people like to ask me about, and I know they ask you about, I've watched many people ask you today about it, and that's the coming temple. This whole idea of there's going to be a third temple built. Is it on the Temple Mount? Is it in the city of David? Is it where the Dome of the Rock stands? And people ask these questions. Do we need a third temple for Jesus to return? And so I know people have different eschatologies, people have different views on the things to come, and a lot of what we talk about is speculation, but we try to keep it as biblically grounded as we can. So I want to pose that question to you. What's going on with the third temple?
Well, let me say this first, since some of your focus is archaeology. A lot of archaeologists try to stay away from politics, even religion itself, but you can't do that because obviously as a biblical archaeologist, your focus is the Bible, which is considered a religious text by most. And then you can avoid politics, especially with the whole war in Israel now. It's based on archaeology. In other words, if you talk about who owns the land, who has a right to the land, the history of the land is based on archaeology. And as you dig in the land, which you unearth, of course, is a Jewish history, or Jewish presence. So that moves archaeology from apolitical to very political. People are using it on both sides to make a case. When it comes to the issue of the temple, which is heretofore, I guess, for many just been a historical or archaeological interest, there are Orthodox Jewish groups who have really always had as a goal, because the prayers of the Jewish people, the daily prayer calls for the speedy rebuilding of the temple in our generation or our time. It may soon be rebuilt. So from a Jewish perspective, this is part of what their mindset is constantly. There's a text in Exodus chapter 25, verse 8 that says, when God spoke first to Moses, says, "Let them make for me a sanctuary that I may dwell in their midst." I use the word mishkan there, and that I may shkan, the verb to dwell. So make my dwelling place that I can dwell there. So the purpose of the temple was so that God could establish a relationship with his chosen people in his chosen land. And that, therefore has been the objective of the Jewish people in exile, to return to that land, to be restored. And the centerpiece of that was to return God to his place by rebuilding the temple. So that has been of interest. But now, as Israel's come back to the land, let's say 1948 when they became a state, 67 Jerusalem became again the capital of Israel, things have been renewed. There's been the thought that for the first time in history it's been possible to maybe actualize some of these prophetic promises and hopes. So it's been a growing thing. In 1967, even though the hopes were there, we settled on a status quo arrangement which ended up with Muslims in control of the Al-Aqsa, which they call the Temple Mount, Jews call the Temple Mount, and Jews relegated to the Western Wall, or what they call the Kotel or Wailing Wall, for the purpose of remaining, away from the Muslim area. They would not allow a non-Muslim to go there for religious purposes.
Right.
But in 1987, the First Intifada began, and there were those who said, if we don't act or do something, we're in danger of losing our national sovereignty and therefore access to the holy places that we want to acquire. And so temple movement was birthed. Some people saw it outwardly. There was a temple institute that was started to talk about making implements for the third temple. That was the first serious thing some people had seen. The Temple Mount faithful were doing activist things, different feasts coming out and carrying a model of the temple and wearing sackcloth and doing various things. And so it was to raise public consciousness that we need a temple. I think the majority of Israelis and Jews worldwide, either secular or just didn't care, they even saw it as a problem, because if you upset the Muslim community, you could put Israel in danger and cause a lot of problems. So not much was happening, but those times I think we turned a corner with that. Since the war began on October 7th of 2023, and the attack was from the Hamas side and from other, even Hezbollah too, have all voiced that the reason that they attacked Israel now was because of increased prayers on the Temple Mount, as they saw steps toward Jews taking over Al-Aqsa and having their own, one step closer to rebuilding the temple and these things. And so as a reprisal to that, Jews have said, look, if you attacked us, the worst attack in 75 years since the Holocaust, and we've suffered this way, there's no more of let's try to placate the Muslim community, let's try to share things. It's not possible any longer. We've come beyond that. And it's not just that with Hamas in Gaza or Hezbollah in the north, it's with all of the Palestinians in the West Bank who are under Fatah. And unfortunately, even a lot of the Palestinians are considered Israeli Arabs,
right,
who don't consider themselves Israeli, they consider themselves Palestinians.
Sure.
But ideologically and in solidarity with these terrorist groups, they have embraced October 7th. They have, and it's because of the education of youth in United Nations supported schools, as well as in schools in these areas where girls and boys are separated, but they basically teach terrorist ideology from the very outset. So and so there's not even the hope of a new generation embracing new ideals or coming closer to Israel. There were some times when rapprochement like that seemed possible, but that's just not reality anymore. You've seen the marches for anti-Semitism around the globe. You've seen it on U.S. college campuses. We're in it's a new era. We're not going back to the way things were.
Right. We are divided like we've never been, and not just in America, but around the world, politically, religiously. And this war in Israel has been it's been an example to us, and it's maybe even been more of a driving wedge. Sides are forming, and people are politically and religiously charged, and that really plays into this more than we can imagine.
So where we are now is that there are Jews in the Israeli government that like to take things further. They'd like to assert the sovereignty they have in principle, in practice on the Temple Mount, by rejecting the status quo, which really hasn't existed practically since at least the year 2000, and because the Muslims changed all of that. They tore up a whole section of the southern end of the Al-Aqsa, the Temple Mount, created a 10,000-seat mosque called the Al-Wadi Mosque, and other things. And even before that, Yasser Arafat had the ambition of creating a unified mosque on the Temple Mount by filling the known cisterns with water from the sacred Zamzam in Mecca. Crazy ideas, and he wanted to be buried there as others to desanctify the site in terms of Israeli ideas. So this has all been ongoing, but now there's a point, I think, possibly of no return. The only restraint would be in terms of the international community. So you can see The Hague has already called Netanyahu and Gantz a war criminal, and having all this kind of stuff. But here's where Israel comes. They come to the place, if the world's against me, then I'm against the world. Sure. Basically, we have to have our own sovereign. It's always been that way. When the Jews returned, they developed one of the best armies in the world, but they said no one else is going to defend us. We have to be able to defend ourselves.
Sure.
They had to be able to tell the Jewish community, if you come here, you have a safe haven. We'll protect you. Well, October 7th changed that for many people. It wasn't just, even Holocaust survivors were killed in all of this. And, all of a sudden there was no safe place. But then there's no safe place in the world either. You see all the riots, and you see the pogroms, frankly, in France and Holland and things like this. You see the massive outpouring of just pure ignorance about the history of Israel's in the land, but just calling for jihad, global jihad. Okay, this kind of stuff. So now Israel's at the place where they say, listen, we got to do what we got to do to secure ourselves and our land.
And they're very aware. You can't go to Israel without running into tour groups of soldiers who are being taken around
all the time.
And they're shown what they're fighting for. Never again, they say on Masada.
Yeah. So here's the deal. If you have sovereignty every place but the one place that would matter for religious Jews, in other words, the temple is a symbol of Israel's sovereignty because it could only be built when Israel had control. It doesn't have control, so it's not been rebuilt. But to the extent that Jews have been forbidden to even come to the site to pray, and even more so that from that point to say that none of the land of Israel belongs to Jews, they all need to be excised. This kind of, from the river to the sea.
Right.
There's what's between the river and the sea, just the land of Israel. So this is what's happened. So now people have said, okay, even secular Jews. I saw a statistic said half of Israeli Jews now believe the temple needs to be rebuilt, not for religious purposes, but to assert sovereignty over Jerusalem, our capital, that it's indivisible, that it belongs here, and that Jews have a right to this. If the Muslims don't want to give that right, then we take what is our right in our capital and our place. So these have been radical assertions, even thoughts. You didn't go there, you didn't say that. In government circles, that was only talked about hush-hush ways. Most people outwardly would say, I'm not for this, we want to protect the rights of everyone, we're democracy. But now it's a matter of survival, and it's come down to where people are saying, if we are this close to the possible end of Israel, the only hope for Israel is the return of the Messiah, and we say the return of Jesus. And with that, the promises of the Bible, if he's going to come back literally, and the scriptures he comes back to outskirts of Jerusalem on the Mount of Olives, and there's a future in the land. That's just, in Acts 1:11, when he left, these angels told the disciples watching him go into heaven, this Jesus will come in just the same way you've seen him go into heaven. Where did he go from? He left from basically the Mount of Olives. He's going to come back to the same place. Zechariah 14:3 tells us, in that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives just east of Jerusalem. So these things are expected to happen, and we expect them to happen literally, because if he's coming at all, it's literal. And the things that describe his coming and the place of his coming should also be accepted as literal. Sure. Whatever your eschatology, you need to respect the Bible, because if all the prophecies related to the first coming of the Messiah are accepted literally by everyone, why should not the prophecies related to the second coming?
Sure. And I was going to ask that, we all have different ideas of the second coming of Jesus. Our eschatologies vary, but whatever it is, there is something going on here that we need to be aware of. What should Christians be looking at when we look at this whole idea of rebuilding this temple, the coming of the Messiah, or the return of Jesus Christ? How should Christians look at this whole idea of rebuilding this third temple?
Well, obviously we should look at it biblically, and this is a Jewish concern, not a Christian concern. We're concerned because in God's prophetic program, this is one of the things that is part of that program, and it leads to other things, which are our hopes. I know there are people perhaps listening who don't realize that ancient Israel is also modern Israel, that there's a continuity. They try to separate that, but that's not really possible. And the promises made to ancient Israel will be fulfilled in the future, either by modern Israel or their successors. So And the temple is a part of that. Now, people will say, well, if you believe in a temple, it's retrogressive. You're going back. Jesus is no longer necessary. Going back to animal sacrifices. Well, remember, I mean, Jesus offered animal sacrifices. There's no question that he did that 3 times a year when he came to the temple with his family.
Right.
Paul, who was, the apostle to the Gentiles, offered sacrifices for men. And he said even often as I have to be at Jerusalem for the feast. He interrupted his missionary journeys to do that. Peter and John going to pray in Acts 3 are going up to the temple at the very time of the offering of the sacrifices when they met the lame man on the way.
Sure.
And over and over again we see this. It says that they were in the temple daily praising God. Why there? Because that's the place that God had ordained for his people. That's where Jesus carried out his ministry. So this is an idea. Now, the sacrificial system began in the garden, after the Garden of Eden, but it sort of began there with Cain and Abel. You see this, apparently Adam had offered sacrifices in continuity with what God had showed him when he offered a sacrifice for him. Mm-hmm. So the temple and the idea of a temple existed before there were actual physical temples. It was simply God's presence dwelling with his people. That's the promise. And a literal structure was necessary because a holy God in the midst of an unholy people can't really coexist without something. And so God designed the sanctuary for that purpose.
Sure.
So,
and can we talk about that sanctuary
sure.
some of the time? We know that God had Moses build the tabernacle. And the tabernacle moved from place to place. It sat at Shiloh for over 300 years. And it housed in the most holy place the Ark of the Covenant, the place where God spoke to Moses and to the priests. And then, of course, we know that it was moved to the city of Jerusalem. David had the Ark of the Covenant moved there. The tabernacle did a little moving.
From Kiryat Yarim, it was there first, which is Abu Ghosh today. But it was.
But yeah, it was moved there, and then
because that was always the focal point. When God said in Deuteronomy 12, He said, "When you come to the land, we need to have a central sanctuary." Mm-hmm. He said, "This place where I'll plant my people," and that was the intention. But Jerusalem was held by the Jebusites.
Right.
And they waited for David to do that, and they waited for Solomon to build the first temple, and then, of course, Israel always surrounded by its enemies, and it only had protection if it followed God.
Right.
So these were covenants made with him on that basis, covenants to bless or covenants to curse. And so the history of Israel has been one of desecration and restoration.
Right.
And so we're now living in the time of desecration, where for the most part Jewish people do not embrace the Messiah we know, who came and walked in their land and called himself Yeshua. But that day is coming, and part and parcel to that are the signs of the times that lead there, and the temple is one of those signs.
Right. And so it sits on that piece of real estate that is one of the most contentious places in the world. And people have tried to come up with ideas like, it could be somewhere else. We could put it in the city of David. Does the temple need to be in that spot?
It does. I mean, first off, we know that God chose that spot, and the Shekinah glory came to that spot. When it departed, Ezekiel talks about it returning, and it returned in exactly the same way it left, to the same place it left. That was very important. When they rebuilt the second temple, they built it on the ruins of the same place. Ezra is very specific about that. And so that second temple remained. Herod simply brought it down, almost to the bedrock and rebuilt it, but he didn't move it. It stayed right there. So because of the promise of the return of God's glory in the future, it has to be built there. That was the place that was sanctified and chosen by God. Jews would go further and say, the stone under there is the foundation stone from the creation of the world and many other things. But no, it can't be any other place. So you have to identify where is that place. But both historically and archaeologically, the only place is that place identified today as the central location on that 36 acre esplanade called the Temple Mount.
Wow, thank you. That answers a lot of questions. Dr. Price, if our viewers want to know more about you and your work and more about what we've been talking about today, where can they find more about you?
I have a website called worldofthebible.com. So there we have a YouTube channel, we have other types of Facebook pages, all of that, but just go to worldofthebible.com and you'll see things about the past of Israel, which is the archaeological focus, the present, which is the Middle East conflict, and the future, which deals with Bible prophecy.
Well, thank you, Dr. Price, for being with us today, and thank you for your work.
Thanks so much.
Randall Price's book, The Temple and Bible Prophecy, is a must-have for any student of the prophetic scriptures. This well-researched book brings together real-world events and actions with Bible prophecy in a clear and compelling manner. Randall Price focuses on the building of a new Jewish temple in Jerusalem and current events that tells the reader that the time is near. The Temple and Bible Prophecy by Randall Price. Order your copy today when you call 1-800-652-1144. That's 1-800-652-1144. You can also order the Temple and Bible Prophecy book on our website, swrc.com. Friends, let the beauty of God's creation and the truth of His Word guide you in the new year with our brand new 12-month calendar filled with prophetic scriptures. Each month of the Foretold and Fulfilled 2025 prophecy calendar features a breathtaking landscape photo thoughtfully paired with a prophetic Bible verse and a short devotional to encourage and inspire your walk with God. Order your SWRC prophecy calendar today when you visit our website, swrc.com, or when you call 1-800-652-1144. And when you order the Foretold and Fulfilled prophecy calendar, you are making an eternal impact. Proceeds support the Onesimus Prisoner Outreach Ministry, which delivers hope, faith, and transformative resources to men and women in prison. Together, let's share the light of the gospel with those seeking redemption. Foretold and Fulfilled, the 2025 prophecy calendar. 1-800-652-1144. Friends, we're so glad you're here today. If you're a new listener to Watchman on the Wall, make sure you request your new listener pack. Inside, you'll find the latest issue of our Prophetic Observer newsletter and a special gift. Request your free new listener pack when you call 1-800-652-1144. That's 1-800-652-1144. Lord willing, we'll be back here Monday, ready to once again bring clarity to the chaos. Head into the weekend with the encouragement that God is still on the throne, and prayer changes things. Watchman on the Wall is a production of Southwest Radio Ministries and is supported by faithful listeners like you. Visit swrc.com.